Week 12 in the books. Winners, losers. Those are easy to see on the scoreboard. Of course, you just go through the scores, but the true winners and losers from a big week 12 in college football. Winners, Georgia, huge way, statement game. Tennessee at home took control after the first drive, gave up a touchdown, went down 7-0, steamrolled, wore down the Tennessee team. No, they did not demolish them, annihilate them, rout them, embarrass them, but took control of the game physically, wore them down, proved to be the superior team, at least on that night. And I do believe that that game means something substantial. Georgia, big winner. Oregon, winner, loser. Winner on the scoreboard. Loser in regards to showing us any kind of susceptibility, flaws. Yes, every team is flawed. Oregon reverted to the team that we saw the first 2 weeks of the season. They played a Wisconsin team that really has not shown us any ability to hang for 4 quarters and be able to score against a decent team. Wisconsin has 3 wins this season in the Big Ten against teams that going into Saturday's play were 3-16. Wisconsin's been outscored in its losses against USC, Penn State, and Oregon 49-3. They're a 5-5 football team. They were at home. That is a big advantage or it's a substantial advantage, decided advantage. I don't want to overplay it. I'm not the guy that believes that home field is just everything and basically picks games based on home field advantage. But it has, down through the years, been one of the better places to play in college football in regards to home field advantage for the Badgers. And Oregon struggled mightily. Wisconsin was the better team from about second quarter, third quarter into the fourth quarter. They were the more physically dominant team. They controlled the game. They don't have a passing attack. They've got a bad quarterback. They can't move the ball through the air. They are not explosive. They don't even have explosive players on defense, but they played a tough game and they outplayed Oregon much of the game. But Oregon made the plays that either a flawed team that is scraping by makes against a pretty marginal team on the road, and they just got it done, or a championship caliber team makes on an off week in which they don't have their A game, B game, C game, and are playing something like a D+ game and still survive. As I mentioned in our call-in show last night, you got to go back to 1995, Nebraska. Check out the Nebraska 1995 results. They were not challenged the entire season. I forget who the game was against. It was either Washington or Washington State, I believe, in non-conference play. That is the closest score you will find for 1995 Nebraska. And if you look at the game itself, you will see that there was a late touchdown or two that made it look closer than it actually was, that Nebraska was that dominant from the start of the season all the way through, including that demolition of Florida in the Fiesta Bowl to win the national championship. Therefore, every team that has competed for a national championship or won a national championship has not only lost a game, but has either lost a game or been pushed to the brink by a mediocre team. So in almost every one of those seasons, we would have to go through them, and maybe this will be an exercise for the off season, because that's when we save those type of projects for the off season. We will run through, and I'm almost certain, based on I have done this informally, looked at every team going through the championship runs of every team, and even the teams that competed highly for a national championship. Obviously, the teams that only competed and did not win national championships lost games, but I'm talking about losing games or playing extremely close games to teams that were marginal teams. 7-5 teams, weak 8-4 teams, 6-6 teams, etc. Miami, 2001, considered by many to be the greatest football team of all time. I don't know that to be true. I know that based on their NFL success, that you could say that is the most talented team of all time. 2001 Miami, they had a couple cliffhangers in that season, even though they wrapped it up with a Rose Bowl annihilation of Nebraska. they had a few games that season against decent teams. Boston College comes to mind in particular, decent teams, and scraped by. So when we see a team like Oregon struggle, when we see a team like Ohio State a couple weeks ago against Nebraska struggle, we should take note of that. It means something. Does it mean that there's no way they can win a national championship? Like, that is the ultimate concern. That is the ultimate red flag. And there is no way they can get themselves together? Absolutely not, because it happens every year. Maybe some Michigan fans out there are thinking, well, we went 15-0 last year. We were not pushed. Okay, I'm not counting the Ohio State game because they were elite. They were one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the country. I'm not even counting the Penn State game as being a relatively close game that was up in the air in the fourth quarter because Penn State, again, was a 10-3 football team. I'm talking about the Maryland game. That went down to the wire. That was an extremely close game. And that was Michigan's close call against a fairly marginal team. Maryland was decent. They won a bowl game. They went 8-5. They were about the 35th or 40th best team in the country. And Michigan struggled in that particular game. So that is Michigan's example. And they did not even play anybody quality in the non-conference. So again, everyone is going to have an off week. Do we take note of it? Of course we do. Ohio State had huge offensive line issues against Nebraska. If that would have persisted the next week against Penn State and then the last 2 games that they played, absolutely, we would say, look at that. You're not going to win a national championship with that kind of offensive line play. No one will. I don't care how many weapons you have. Offensive line is paramount to a national championship. However, the Buckeyes rebounded. But if they go on to win a national championship, regardless of how many games they lose between now and then, the potential of them losing games would basically be 2. They can only lose 1 of 2 games left. Or possibly they could lose, basically Ohio State can only lose 1 game this regular season and still make the playoff, and that's going to put their playoff chances in jeopardy with all those teams in the SEC headed toward a 10-2 finish. Or they could lose the Big Ten championship game, and then obviously once we start the playoffs, nobody can lose a game. I had a point there, and I missed it. But we do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football, and we will go through the scores. We will go through the box scores. I thought about actually starting a box score stream, either a box score stream or a box score video, where we would do all the Big Ten box scores, all the SEC box scores, all the Big 12, all the ACC, and divide those into videos because I'm a nerd. And I hate going to bed late Saturday night without going through all the box scores and all the recaps, but that's impossible because that would take about probably 20 minutes per game, and that would take forever. But I get to as many as I possibly can because I like to see all the box scores and I like to see all the game recaps. So I'm up to date on everything, and I've got a pretty good lock on what happened over the weekend. We got a comment coming in. We've got Ryan. Thank you so much for being here at the Voice of College Football. The Wisconsin fan base is frustrated with Fickle. There's no difference between Fickle and Christ. Thanks for the contribution, Ryan. I can understand that. I can also understand in this day and age of college football that you would be frustrated near the end of season 2. So we can see that nothing's going to be accomplished this year at Wisconsin, whether they finish 7-5 because they win their last 2 games, or even 8-5 with a bowl win, or they finish 5-7. Both of them are actually quite possible that they could lose the final 2 games of the season. They've got Nebraska, they've got Minnesota. Those are definitely 2 teams that could beat them. Even if they win the games, you're going to be frustrated in this day and age of college football and all the focus on the playoff and progress for the program. Paul Chryst was fired because this program was entering a new era in a new conference with increased competition and did not appear to be capable of elevating to a status to compete with all the powers in the Big Ten and had fallen behind. Luke Fickell looked like a guy that could elevate Cincinnati to be able to play with occasionally the best in college football and certainly be the best edition of anyone in the group of five. And his program was. It was the elite group of five program the final 3 seasons he was there. So much was expected of Luke Fickell. I would say to be patient, but also to understand that maybe Luke Fickell is not going to get it done there, because most great coaches show immediate dividends. Most of the time, regardless of where they place in a particular program, meaning taking over an atrocious program and having to lift it up to reasonable standards, say taking over a 2 or 3 win program and then elevating it to bowl eligibility the next season or the second season and then on from there, or they take over a decent program, have to elevate it. It is difficult to find a head coach that eventually succeeded at a high standard and did not show immediate results. Usually they clean it up pretty quickly. They show some progress, some substantial progress. And Luke Fickell, of course, took over a team that just went 7-6 the year that he preceded him. And that was kind of a dysfunctional year in that they had Paul Chryst for just a few games. I think they were 3-2 at the time, something like that. Jim Leonard took over and finished out the season. So it wasn't the best situation. And they still, I believe, went 7-6. And I believe Paul Chryst's final full season was 9-4. So they're not doing that. So I understand your frustration. There were high hopes there. There was optimism. I considered that to be the best, second best, third best, the upper tier hire of that offseason. Matt Rule, Luke Fickell. There was probably somebody else in there that I highly evaluated at the time. When you see them play as they did last night, when you see them play as they did for almost the entire Penn State game, and you see them play the first half against USC, and it's not like those teams that they were playing didn't make mistakes to keep them in the game, but they largely stayed in the games based on their own merit. But they get steamrolled over the course of the final 5 minutes or second half. This is what Wisconsin shows me. They don't really show me that they're outstanding at anything. If we went back 10 years ago, 5 years ago, Wisconsin would show us an outstanding tailback, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. And I know that they lost Chez Mellusi earlier this season, and Tyree Walker's a nice back, but he's not an elite back. But we could go through the list of Wisconsin running backs going all the way back to Ron Dane, all the way through, and even prior to Ron Dane, Terrell Fletcher and Brent Moss, the duo that I believe took Wisconsin to its first Rose Bowl under Barry Alvarez, all the way through early 90s, all the way through to just a couple years ago. Always an elite back, usually 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. If you go back about 10 or 12 years, look at some of those Rose Bowl teams, you will see 4 guys on the roster. Obviously, they all didn't play at that particular time, but you'll see, oh, they were playing these 3, and then they had a freshman here that turned out to be James White, Monte Ball, Melvin Gordon. And so the line of Wisconsin running backs has been outstanding, maybe the best in the country over the past 30 years. Don't see that guy. Even when Chez Mellusi was healthy and playing well, really good running back, not that guy, not Melvin Gordon, Monte Ball guy. Offensive line. Again, when I point these things out, the standard is super high. the standard over the last 30 years has been arguably the best offensive line group in the country. For not recruiting at the level of Alabama, I know that for a long time, Alabama and Wisconsin produced the most first-round NFL offensive linemen and also the most overall draft picks at that position. Their offensive line is nowhere close to that level of offensive line. They usually had a tight end who was an excellent player, who was a main weapon, maybe the weapon in the passing game. They were never that good at wide receiver. I can think of a few guys. We can go through the list. They had decent wide receivers, but they got by with a marginal group of wide receivers that were mid-tier in the conference. The wide receivers, the defensive backs, the quarterbacks, mid at Wisconsin. They won because they had a dominant offensive line. They had dominant backs. They had a dominant front seven that was just about as good as anybody in the country. If there was a better group of front seven over the majority of the last 20 years, it was typically because Alabama or Clemson or Georgia or Ohio State or somebody just loaded up on NFL picks and was just so outstandingly fast, freakish, athletic up front that Wisconsin wasn't that. But in terms of being the Iowa of today or 2023, Wisconsin was that almost every year. When I saw the stat the other day that Wisconsin came into this game against Oregon, 91st in the country against the run, and then I always go to the yards per play, and it was about just as bad. That is atrocious. So Jim Leonard is missed. Paul Chryst was a better coach than maybe we thought. I thought it was simply a situation where Wisconsin said, Paul Chryst is a nice coach. We're a decent program. We are top 15 at our best, and we're top 30 at our worst. And we're going to, though, take the brunt of stepping into a new era, new conference, and we're going to take on a more difficult schedule. It's not going to be the Big Ten West +3. It's going to be a really difficult schedule, and we don't believe Paul Chryst has the drive, the energy, the focus. He's not put the program on the trajectory to be able to compete at the best, and we don't want to go 7-5 every year. Therefore, we're going to go out and grab a star in the making, a guy on the rise, a young guy, energetic guy that's going to take this program, put a face on it that is going to galvanize the fan base, the alumni, and going to be somebody that people recognize. There's just a difference. Paul Chryst, Luke Fickell of 2021, 2022, taking Cincinnati to the playoff, that appeared to be an excellent choice, and maybe it still will turn out to be. They have to find a quarterback. And they took a shot at Tyler Van Dyke. I don't know if he would have turned out. We will never know. I don't know if he's coming back for this final season next year, what he's going to do there. I've got to think that he must have been a freshman in 2021, 22, 23. Of course, he can redshirt this year and come back. I don't know what their thoughts are about upgrading at the position, or if they have seen enough from Tyler Van Dyke during the offseason, during August camp, that they think that he is the guy moving forward. But they need a quarterback. There have certainly been tons of quarterbacks that were rated lower than Braden Locke who have succeeded in college football. But unless I'm missing something, the times that I've seen Braden Locke play, he just looks somewhat lost. And I hate to say that because I'm not into criticizing players, but he's just not a good quarterback. Okay, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Please lock in for the next several minutes. We'll see how long we go. We left the call-in line both on X and also here in the chat. Okay. Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. When you shop Amazon, please use the link that we provide. If I opened up the books to you, if you saw the Voice of College Football finances, First of all, you would be appalled. No, if I open up the books to you, you would understand that, man, if we took everybody that watched the videos on the regular basis, came to the live streams, and if they use the Amazon link, and I know that not everybody's going to do it, that's mathematically impossible. But if 10%, be one of the 10%, because I got to think it's about 1% now, that is the one way that you can financially support the voice of college football without spending a penny. So for every dollar you spend at Amazon, why send them the entire dollar? Send us here at the Voice of College Football 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cents, something like that, depending on the product. And that would help tremendously. Again, based on the average American consumer, if you would dig in and just use that link, there is nothing else to it. Absolutely nothing else to it. It does not change your shopping experience at all. Same shopping experience, does not cost you a penny. So we appreciate you doing that. All right, let's get to the scores, the schedule. Here are my impressions. Let's go to the FBS scores. No, I am not going to analyze Tuesday's MAC games. Don't worry. Although, I just want to see them. So here we go. This week's scores. Buffalo beat Ball State 51-48. Buffalo's 4-2 in the MAC. Bowling Green beat Western Michigan 31-13. Bowling Green is 5-1 in the MAC. Toledo 37, Central Michigan 10. So we've got a 4-2 Rockets team under Jason Candle. Kent is still perfect, 0-10. They lost to Miami 34-7. Akron lost to Northern Illinois 29-16. Of course, the team that defeated Notre Dame. So it's always interesting to peek in to see Northern Illinois' record, how they're doing otherwise. They're 6-4, 3-3 in the MAC. They beat Notre Dame. Ohio over Eastern Michigan 35-10. The Bobcats are 5-1 in the MAC. Okay, on Thursday, Tulsa 31, but East Carolina 38. There's a former Indians announcer, Herb Score, who used to read scores backwards. So pardon me for doing that. That was so annoying. East Carolina defeated Tulsa 38-31. Pirates with a comeback season this year at 6-4. I will have fun this offseason once the regular season is over, going through the plus and minus 3. If you guys are keeping up with the Voice of College statistic, it's the one that I will take credit for. The plus or minus 3, how many teams across college football either elevate by at least 3 games from the previous season or decline by at least 3 games. It is substantial. Colorado State beat Wyoming 24-10. Texas San Antonio over North Texas 48-27. I watched this game start to finish. Washington beat UCLA 31-19. Huskies eligible for bowl play at 6-5. I think that's a decent season for Jedd Fisch coming in after they lost everything that they did. I am going to say thumbs up to Jedd Fisch and the job that he's done at Washington. They've been competitive against just about everyone. Arizona beat Houston 27-3. This is a washout season for the Wildcats, but they did pick up a win at home against the Cougars, who have surprised some teams in the Big 12. There's the game we've talked about. Oregon got past Wisconsin 16-13, outscoring the Badgers 10-0 in the fourth quarter to get it done there. Jordan James had 115 yards on the ground. Dylan Gabriel looked mid-marginal. Again, the Badgers defense took it to him. Is this a warning sign for the Ducks, or did they just basically scrape by playing a D-plus game on the road in a difficult environment? I would check box number 2 until further notice. Buckeyes 31, Wildcats 7 at Wrigley Field. Ohio State pretty much did what we expect Ohio State to do. They gave up a first drive long drive down the field, forced a fumble. Then the second drive, Northwestern went right down the field with Bryce Kurtz and A.J. Henning making big plays, put up a touchdown to make it 7-0, and it is typical for the Ohio State defense. They look shoddy the first couple drives, then they tighten up and they dominate, and the Buckeyes won 31-7. They've got the showdown against Indiana. I saw probably at least half of the Texas-Arkansas game. The Hogs had a shot. They turned it over a couple times. They pushed Texas. They outplayed them in the second half, but Texas wins 20-10. Quinn Ewers, despite marginal stats, actually played well. They just were very conservative in this game against Arkansas. The Texas defense was dominant against an Arkansas offense that has been quite explosive this year. Penn State all over Purdue. I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. Purdue is horrible. They're the worst team in the Big Ten by far. Penn State is Penn State, and this is a good game for them to exercise and stretch their legs and feel good about being explosive against the worst team in the Big Ten. 49-10. One of the biggest games of the day, BYU losing against Kansas 17-13. I did not see one play of that game. I was right here with all of you. So BYU goes down 17-13. This team should have lost 2 or 3 or 4 games at this point, so that is no big surprise. BYU was just a 2.5-point favorite at home, so even Vegas against a 3-6 team knows the value of BYU. What they've done and accomplished this season, much like Indiana, is remarkable. It's honorable. It's noteworthy. Pat them on the back. Are they one of the 12 best teams in the country? Absolutely not. Are they one of the 25 best teams in the country? Probably not. They're on that fringe. But if they go on to the Big 12 championship game and win, then they'll be in good shape, of course. So everything's still out in front of BYU and Colorado. They are now the 2 front runners with only 1 loss each in conference play. Let me get to 2 more scores, then we'll take our first call. We got Georgia 31, Tennessee 17. Bulldogs controlled this game, were clearly the better team. Tennessee scored on the first drive. Dylan Sampson's an awesome running back, but Carson Beck played well. The entire team played well. I can't really point out anything in particular after the first drive of the game that Georgia did not do well. They were playing one of the 10 best teams in the country, and they outscored them 31-10 after the first drive of the game. They doubled up in yardage in the second half. They controlled the line of scrimmage. The offensive line was strong. Carson Beck was strong. The receivers made plays. Oscar Delp scored a couple touchdowns. He looked like he changed his uniform to number 19. The defense was dominant against a really good Tennessee rushing attack, and Nico Iamaleava played pretty well. And I think he's still coming back from injury to a certain extent. I don't think he's 100%. Notre Dame beat Virginia 35-14. The only unfortunate thing here is they did not cover the spread after being up in this game. I believe at one point 35-0 that they couldn't cover the 21.5 for me is rather disappointing. All right. Let's take a call from our guy, David Greenshield.
Yes. Just wanted to chime in. Really interesting day of college football yesterday, Mark. By the way, did you watch the noon game, the Colorado Utah game?
No.
Okay. I watched parts of it. Obviously, the Buckeyes were on against Northwestern. I saw a little bit of it. I have to say, I question whether, Colorado is an improved football team or whether they're just kind of taking advantage of the Big 12 a couple of weeks ago after they'd beaten Texas Tech. I actually think they're an improved football team. I actually think Deion has brought this team along, and they're a better football team. They seem to be a little bit better on the offensive line. And, Shador is Shador. I think he's a really good quarterback, obviously. And, I'm impressed. I think they've got some guys that can make some plays on the outside. I still don't know if they're good on the defensive side of the football, especially if they meet an offense that can really do some damage. But I just got to say, this is a better football team than we saw early in the season. I don't know what your thoughts are about Colorado and maybe Colorado moving forward.
I checked in on this game with me rooting for Utah to at least cover the spread. That was my rooting interest in this game. and they really should have. But anyway,
Yep.
um, that yeah, I checked in. It was obviously Colorado jumped out to an early lead. They had a 2-score lead most of the game. I jumped in at 35-24. Utah was moving the ball down the field. They've got a third-string quarterback playing, Isaac Wilson. Colorado looked pretty impressive in that, even though Utah was moving the ball and threatening like they could make it a 1-score game, they dialed up a couple blitzes. They had some speed rushers come off the edge, and they forced a turnover. And then, of course, Colorado took it down the field and scored and iced the game and finished them off. Utah's got, for as much as they've fallen off this year and run into injuries and all of that, one of the best tight ends in college football hasn't played. Of course, Cam Rising. That Utah still has a really good defense. And again, I didn't see Colorado do it because I didn't watch the game, but they obviously were successful offensively. So that offense can score apparently against just about anybody. I don't think they're going to be a threat in the playoffs, but they'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, because obviously if they win the conference, they could end up being the 3 or the 4 seed and get the bye.
Yeah.
And then, you're looking at a home game, and well, no, they would get a path to the quarterfinals. So they
Sure.
wouldn't actually, have to. I was going to say, I thought they would have a home game in Boulder. What would that be like? But they would have a path to the quarterfinals there.
Yeah. So let's just play it out. Let's say Miami wins the ACC championship at 12-1. Colorado goes 11-2. They win the Big 12. They'll be the 4 seed.
Right.
So then they would play the 5 seed. So hello, Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas. That's who they're
Right.
playing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, good luck with that. Maybe in the quarters. Is that what you're saying there, Mark?
Well, I'm saying good luck to them. Yeah, I don't think that they can hang, but I'm sure they'll make it fun. I don't mean that they're going to get steamrolled 52-10. I think they're dangerous. I think, yeah, they're offensively dangerous. And I don't really know exactly. At the point that I caught the broadcast, Joel Klatt was running down their wide receiver crew because I recognized the names, but I didn't see Jimmy Horn. I think he's
Yeah.
injured.
I thought he was hurt, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, he's their best wide receiver, so he didn't play. And I don't know how much I think they're utilizing Travis Hunter quite a bit.
Yeah, I saw his final stats. I think he caught 5 or 6 balls in the game. I did want to get to him too, Mark. Is he catching? I know you don't do a lot on the Heisman here, but he may be one of those players that's catching a year where this is typically a quarterback award, that he may be in a season with where the quarterback play being where it's at across college football. I thought Cam Ward had maybe a track earlier in the season, and then, Miami had their loss. That maybe he's playing in a season where the quarterback play isn't as dominant as it would be in a typical Heisman year, and maybe he's got a path, to win the award that way.
Yeah. Maybe I'll look at it this week because it's my own fault that people have tagged me with like hating the Heisman, or I ignore the Heisman. Maybe the comment that I make frequently when people ask me to predict the Heisman, that I can't predict what other people are going to vote. That doesn't mean that I'm not invested in the Heisman. I do think it's the most prestigious award in the history of sports. I don't agree with all the winners, but that's fine. Nobody does. So maybe I'll do a Heisman look. But I don't have a strong opinion on the comparison of quarterbacks and running backs because I'd have to look at the stats. I have seen Cam Ward play enough this year to know that if you just watch his arm talent and watch him sling it around, man, he's special. He's fun to watch. He lights it up, but he has these lulls in games.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they only scored 23 points against Georgia Tech, because generally he lights them up the first couple drives. And then he did the same thing against Duke when they went through a stretch of up 14-0 to down 28-17, where for a long stretch of the game, he's going 4 for 13 for 52 yards.
Right.
And then he can throw up 200 yards in a quarter.
Right.
Now, if we're going with the best player in the country, that's where this award is supposed to be headed. I think Travis Hunter should win the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah. Again, back to maybe getting some points for playing both ways too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? being being playing both sides of the football is never going to hurt you. But I was just thinking that though. I think he's also catching a year where you don't have a real dominant quarterback in college football, leading let's say a number one team, putting up incredible stats. So I think that that's going to aid him in his chances of maybe winning the award this year. Not to take anything away from him. He is a great player, and a lot of people think also kind of on the other side of it, because it's maybe a weak year at the quarterback position this year coming up into the NFL draft, they expect him to go really high there as well. So,
Okay, I'm going to throw this out, David. I
yeah.
watched Travis Hunter quite a bit last year. I can't even remember how much I've seen him this year. I don't know that I've watched Colorado play at all. Again, I watched about 10 or 15 plays yesterday. And other than that, I have not watched him play that I can remember at all. But I've seen enough of him. Once I got to see him quite a few times last year, I thought, this guy's amazing. He's the best player in college football. And if he's caught 74 passes and 9 touchdowns, and I heard that he gave up his first touchdown pass at cornerback yesterday, and maybe it didn't even mean much at that point in the game, I'm going to say, unless I see something different, give this guy the Heisman Trophy.
Wow.
Got 74 passes in 10 games. He's going to catch, if they get to the Big 12 championship and he catches 6 or 7 passes, he's going to be well over 90.
Mark, I haven't seen his interception. How many picks does he have this year? Does he have a few interceptions?
We shall see.
I haven't seen all of his defensive stats. I know his receiving stats were really good.
He has 3 picks.
Yeah.
And a tackle for loss. He's got 24 tackles. Yeah.
I mean, let's say he gets another interception or two, ends up with 4 or 5 interceptions, catches, in the mid 80s to upper 80s in passes this season. That's a really good all-around football season, and as I say, in a season where I think there's not a dominant quarterback, I really think that could be his path to the award, especially if yeah.
I'm sorry, David. I was just going to say, as you well know, cornerback statistics, I'm guessing, because I know this was the case last year, and it's probably even more so, that teams are staying away from him.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the ultimate compliment to a cornerback, right, Mark?
Yeah. Deion Sanders didn't intercept that many passes.
Right, because nobody wanted to throw that way. Absolutely. Yep. I wanted to get to the later games too, Mark. I watched, it's interesting. I saw a segment earlier in the week. Greg McElroy and David Pollack were having a conversation. And McElroy was of the opinion that he could see as many as 10 or more teams possibly winning the national championship this year. I think he was way high on that number. Do you maintain that maybe it's only 5, 6, maybe tops, or do you see it as that wide open of a field of teams that could win it this year?
I think that if we were still in a 14 playoff and the bids were this wide open, that Miami can get into a game and beat anyone at any time, one game. There are a lot of teams like that. Penn State, if they got into a game and it went right for them and their defense was hot, could they beat anyone one time because there's probably no great team out there? Yes, but we're in a 12 team and you got to win 3 or 4. Right. I think it's 5 or 6 teams.
Yeah, I maintain that. I did want to say one of the teams, interesting enough, I bet on them in the 330 category. I was happy to do so, and that was Notre Dame. He had Notre Dame as one of those teams. I don't know if I can quite go there yet, because I still wonder if offensively, if they've got to meet a team. And this has always been kind of their situation, back to the Kelly area, is that when they get into the playoff and they meet a team and they have to really score points. If they get into a situation where they have to put 30 plus points on the board, I still wanted to, and I think Marcus can still do a really good job there and be an upgrade from where they were at under Brian Kelly. Now, obviously, Kelly did a really solid job. So for him to upgrade from Brian Kelly would be that maybe he is taking Notre Dame to the ultimate. That being said, I still have that vibe about this Notre Dame team that if they got into the playoff, could they get into a situation if they had to score north of 30 points with the Riley Leonard in that offense? Could they get it done?
I agree with you. They've never shown that ability to do it. Riley Leonard's never been that kind of quarterback. He's not that guy now. And I think we also have to understand that there are teams, and there are very few, that catch our attention and move themselves up in our estimation because they've done something outstanding against a great opponent.
Right,
There are also those teams, what generally happens is teams take themselves off the board. And so you've got a Notre Dame who just holds serve for a long, long time, beating the Virginias and Louisvilles of the world, which is fine. They're
right.
doing what's expected of them, but they're just is anything that Notre Dame and they've accomplished this year been any kind of a revelation to us in any such way as, oh wow, they're a lot better than we thought? No, they're holding serve, doing their job, and teams are falling around them.
Well, I will say this, Mark. Well, a couple points. If Texas A&M beats Texas, I mean, that win looks pretty good,
Sure it
as the
is.
season moves along.
Absolutely.
And then, they beat a solid Louisville team. They beat an undefeated Army team, which are two, I would say, good wins, not great wins, but maybe good wins. We would maybe label them as, you know, I mean, that's working a decent schedule. I would also make the point of Kelly's two playoff appearances. He did meet 2018 Clemson and 2020 Alabama in his two semifinal games. We got to say, as we've just said about the parity this year, there's no 2018 Clemson out there and there's no 2020 Alabama out there. So,
We don't
um,
think so.
yeah. So with there being a parity year of college football. So, you also have to look at it from that perspective as well.
I would also say this Louisville win, it's a good win.
Hmm.
And I thought highly of Louisville based on performances against Notre Dame, Miami, SMU, where they were in the game, had a chance to win, only lost by a touchdown, played a respectable game. Although I think Notre Dame kind of kept them in the game with turnovers. I think
Hmm.
they controlled the game pretty well. Who do you think is a better football team, Louisville or Illinois?
I slight favorite Illinois.
Okay. I'm a bit surprised. I was going to guess that you and other people, if we took a poll, would say that, and this actually gives me an idea. Anyway, I don't know how I would present it. I would love to get people's reactions to just different matchups like that as a comparison point, because I was taking a beating the other night,
Okay.
which I had a pro Notre Dame crowd because I was doing a Notre Dame show, just going crazy on me about Penn State. Well, first of all, I was not the committee ranking Penn State at number 4, but I was taking up for Penn State. Well, and they were touting what a great win Louisville was, which again, I give it all sorts of decent credit. Then this Louisville team lost to a horrendous Stanford team on Saturday.
Right.
They're 6-4.
Yeah.
And the Penn State win against Illinois was given absolutely no credit by the people that I was talking to, nor the chat. And that Illinois team is doing its job, winning games. They're 7-3.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I would favor that to be a one possession field goal kind of game. By the way,
Sure.
that's kind of a closer to a pick 'em
Yeah,
kind of game. I just want to stipulate that.
sure.
So
I
yeah,
agree.
I was wondering kind of what was the difference between Notre Dame and Penn State. Like if they played on a neutral field, I would still favor Penn State over Notre Dame, but I think it would be close.
I think it would be really close. I,
I
I it's hard for me to separate those two teams.
I just think. Well, I still think Aller's ceiling is a little bit higher than Riley Leonard's.
Oh, it
And
is.
And
Yep.
then I think that their combination, but both teams have a tight end to get it to. Both teams have decent backs, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of similarities there. Both teams have an edge rusher that can cause you some problems on the D line. You know, you're right. There's a lot of similarities there. Both teams aren't necessarily explosive on the outside at the wide receiver position. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities there.
If anything, uh, I think Notre Dame has better running backs. For as good as Allen and
Mm,
Singleton are, uh, the two Notre Dame backs, uh, Price and I can't remember the other guy's name. It leaves Love and Price,
yep.
to Darian Price and Jeremiah Love are excellent running back. But the two Penn State running backs, they are really good as well. So I'm not dissing them in any way.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that maybe we're overrating the Penn State running backs a little bit. Maybe possibly. I had heard that one of the running backs has been playing a little bit hurt though. That Singleton has actually been playing a little bit dinged up. But okay, did want to get into some of the night games. Obviously, the two big ones. I'm going to make some comments about Oregon and whiskey, and because I knew you were talking about that game, and then get to the big game. But I do think with Oregon, maybe we saw a little bit of the Oregon we saw early in the season, by the way. That you remember Oregon was having their struggles early in the season. You know, they were having some offensive line struggles early in the season. I thought Wisconsin's defense, you're right, got after him. Dylan Gabriel did not look good. By the way, I still love that Oregon running. Why is their running back's name always eluding me? Oregon's it
Jordan
should.
James, yeah,
Jordan
he's really
James
good.
is a really good player, by the way, and kind of saved them last night with a really good game, by the way, with Gabriel being slightly off. Um, I just want to say I think Oregon offensively can still be as good as anybody. I just wonder how much they also still miss Tez Johnson on the outside too.
That's a good point. Their wide receiver core, even without him, is really good, but he is other level
Yeah,
good. It would be like Ohio State losing Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, where they're still loaded at wide receiver, but the just otherworldly, very elite, arguably the best in the country, missing, um, and all the attention that draws and how that changes how the defense has to be aligned, all of that.
yeah, yeah. I tend to agree. Did they have other injuries offensively? I thought that they had said going into that game they had a couple people that were. I'm not trying to make any excuses by any means for Oregon, but I thought that I had heard that they may have had some injuries.
I don't know if anybody else on the offense. I know that they didn't play with Jordan Birch, their outstanding defensive tackle,
Okay. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
didn't hear anything else on offense. Terrence Ferguson, excellent tight end. Now he was back. He had missed a few games.
Yeah, well, yeah, that D line, you know, with Birch and Harmon, who's been great for them this year, has been really, really good. Yeah, I did want to make a comment about Wisconsin. You were talking about them earlier and where they are with their program with Luke, and maybe even going forward. I had made this comment about them earlier in the season, and you kind of agreed with me, Mark, that they were caught in between with that Phil Longo offense, where it seemed like they were trying to convert from being what Wisconsin was, which is a ground and pound team built around the offensive line, built around a really good running back, you know, as they've been since the Barry Alvarez years of the 1990s, and trying to convert to this, you know, passing game offense. You know, with the quarterback and not maybe really having the right quarterback or the right skill on the outside to convert to that type of offense. And I always wondered why Luke tried to go that direction and just tried to be different and didn't just take the same playbook that basically Barry Alvarez handed down to Bert, to, to Paul Chryst, to all the coaches that came after him, and just build the offense that way around the offensive line, find the right running back, and just be Wisconsin, be typical Wisconsin and try to win that way. And I think they've also lost some close games under him, some real nail biters, some games that could have gone either way. Maybe he's been a little bit Scott Frost, snake bitten in some of these close games. But yeah, I know they like Luke up there, but this is going to be interesting to see where this program goes going forward.
I don't think they were foolish enough to try to transition this offense immediately. I do think that they tried to evolve it and do a transition. It,
Hmm.
it wasn't like they just came out and tried to go five wides and space it out, shotgun every play, and dissed what they had. But I do think that they've moved into, this is my take from 30,000 feet, is that they tried to move into this Phil Longo offense, and they haven't acquired the type of players to do it. I
Hmm.
don't think that they have those kind of players. I don't see. You mentioned Tez Johnson. They don't have anybody in that caliber by any stretch. I see typical Wisconsin personnel. And if you did hear my spiel from a few minutes ago, and that's minus a dominant offensive line, and that's minus a great back or two or three like they've had in the past. They look at tight end, and I don't know that they've got a tight end. They don't have a tight end, I'll say,
Right.
that is of their best lineage in the past, vintage
Right.
Wisconsin tight end. I would like to see them play this season. I would have loved to have seen a quarterback who really knew what he was doing. Not a great quarterback, not Shadur Sanders, like Will Rogers. I would love to have seen them play this season with a, a really smart quarterback who has run that system, who's been in that kind of offense, who has to throw a lot of short passes, just get the ball out of his hands and be extremely accurate. And I think Will Rogers would have run this offense and they might have two more wins right now.
Do you notice though? And I'm not saying this to be an Ohio State homer, but I think I've made this comment before about how many teams in the Big Ten, and if you actually you could put Notre Dame in there, which we always talk of as like kind of a quasi Big Ten team, and this is kind of maybe where I was going with them earlier about their ability to be, explosive on offense and score some points in a playoff game when they need to score north of 30 points. But do you notice that most Big Ten and Midwestern teams' passing games are kind of built the same way outside of Ohio State? They're built around, throwing short to intermediate passes to their tight end, maybe a slot receiver, which the team up north had last year a little bit with Roman Wilson, and maybe, running the ball, building up the offensive line. So running game, short passes to maybe a slot and maybe a tight end, and not really generating a whole lot of explosives on the outside by throwing down the field passes to the wide receivers.
Yes, I'll agree with that with a couple outliers.
Okay.
Jeff Brom at Purdue when he was there, and they had the receivers that they had. I can't think of the guy that was paired with the shoot. Who's the guy that ripped up Ohio State in 2018? The
Oh,
short
yeah.
guy,
Yeah,
Moore.
Rondell Moore.
Rondell
Yeah,
Moore
yeah,
and
yeah.
his running mate, who
David
was
Bell.
actually better than him,
Was that David Bell? Was there other
David
receiver?
Bell,
Okay.
who was eventually just a better prototypical receiver than him. Yeah, those guys, that was a different offense. Obviously, Jeff Brom's one of the best in the business at developing a passing game. And then I would say, who else? Somebody else came to mind. I would say that Penn State was somewhat of a different breed during Trace McSorley's
Yes.
days when they had Chris Godwin and they had
Yep.
more explosive players on the outside.
Yeah, well, no, that's a good point. Remember what I've said to you, Mark, and I've said this for a while. I still think the best Franklin team is the 16 or 17 teams. I keep coming back to that. That was the only Penn State team where I said, okay, they've got a really good college quarterback. Never thought McSorley was an NFL quarterback, but their skill is like on a high level because they had Gesicki at tight end, they had like a Godwin at wide receiver, and they had one of the best running backs come out of the Big Ten in like a while, and obviously Barkley.
Those teams suffered from having bad offensive lines. If
Mm,
those teams, as soon as they got into the issues um, back in 2011, 2012, and had to dig themselves out of all of that, they suffered at offensive line forever. And they probably could have fixed that sooner. Of course, they didn't have the transfer portal, so they never got that fixed. So those teams had pretty marginal offensive lines, or for a good team or a playoff caliber team, a bad offensive line, but they had everything else. They had an
Yeah.
NFL tight end. They had explosive receivers. They had Saquon Barkley, and these two backs that they have right now are really good, but they're nowhere close to Saquon Barkley.
Right.
And they had defenses that were boom. They recruited great defenses, and they were, man, they had NFL players all over the place, and they had a quarterback who was just better at making decisions. And obviously, Trace McSorley added the running threat. So yeah, if those teams would have had an offensive line, then they would have been competing for national championships.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely. That's why I said I thought it was a peak because actually I've said it many, many times. I don't think Aller's the problem with Penn State. I actually think if you gave Aller those offensive weapons, and gave them to him this year, he'd be just as good or better than Trace McSorley. I've even said even if you give him your favorite Penn State quarterback of all time, Mr. Sean Clifford, his receivers like a Hamler or a Dotson or somebody, he'd be even better. So
yeah, well, Aller's better in the passing game than Trace McSorley.
yeah,
of course, McSorley's the guy that gave them the other dimension too.
right, with the running. I wanted to get to the Georgia-Tennessee game. Man, what a bounce back. We talk about Carson Beck was getting heaved all this garbage for how long, and was that Carson Beck's redemption last night, by the way, Mark?
It was his redemption, but that's what's expected of him if he's going to be a big boy and going to lead one of the great programs in the country. And he stated at the beginning of the season he wanted to be a first-round pick. He wanted to win a national championship. He wanted to win a Heisman. Well, forget the Heisman.
Right.
He's still in play for the other two. I don't know how much he's descended down draft boards. I know that it's been fairly significant, but I'm sure he can recover. Yeah, they did everything I could expect them to do against that good of a team, where they got punched in the mouth. Dylan Sampson running the ball down their throat the first drive.
Yeah.
And they're down 7-0, then 10-0 because this punting situation for Georgia, I've just picked up on. They don't give up any punt return yards. Like, their punter's so good in their return or their coverage unit that they had given up -8 yards total this season in punt returns, and then they got hit with a punt return that set up a field goal, and boom, it's 10-0. And then after that, this was Hendon Hooker's Florida team playing Georgia. This was a top 10 or 12 team playing the best team in the country. And I'm not saying Georgia, everybody is the best team in the country, but I'm saying on this night, they looked like this was 2021, 22, and they were Georgia, and Tennessee was a really good team, but not them. And that's how they played the rest of that game.
You sound like you were almost cutting an Uncle Lou tape there for a second, Mark. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, the second half,
I'll leave those to him.
Yeah, leave that to him. I'm sure he's already going off. But yeah, I mean, that second half to shut him out, I was really impressed. Especially, you're right. Tennessee, I thought, made a statement that first drive. Right down the field, they got up 10-0. The one thing I wanted to get to Beck too is I have commented that and I'm not trying to make excuses for the guy, but bottom line, I wondered going into the season with the loss of McConkey and with the loss of Bowers, how they were going to replace that production losses in the passing game for that team, from a year ago. And Delp stepped up, made some plays for him last night, which I think was big. And it seemed like he kind of spread the ball around a little bit. They didn't necessarily have a dominant receiver, but they were able to spread the ball around. I think you had a few guys with 5 or more receptions. And he looked good. I mean, as long as he's not throwing the ball to the other team, I guess he can be a pretty effective quarterback. I did want to comment about Tennessee. I made a comment about Nico earlier in the season, and I don't know if you remember what your opinion was on this, Mark. I don't remember what you said at the time. I said, where is his ceiling? Is his ceiling as high or higher than Hendon Hooker? And do you remember what your answer was?
My answer was that the ceiling was higher.
Okay.
That the floor was lower, because obviously he had proven nothing at that point, and Hendon Hooker turned out to be an excellent college quarterback. So ceiling higher, floor lower.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah. I mean, I again, though, a Tennessee quarterback runs into a Georgia defense and it does not end well. I guess is the long and short of it. And the shame of it all is I thought Tennessee ran the football really well in the game. If they could have gotten a little bit more out of the passing game, they have a chance to pull that game out.
Yeah, statistically, they ran the ball well, and Dylan Sampson again the first few drives of the game, and they brought in the other guy, Peyton Lewis. He was even ramming the ball ahead against this defense. I didn't think Nico was bad in this game. I thought he was fine. I just think Georgia's defense was that good.
Mm,
Trying to see who was in the passing game for them. They've still got Squirrel White, Brew McCoy
right.
playing. Yeah, I'd have to rewatch this game to really diagnose, but like nothing Nico did I find egregiously awful or in any such way.
Right.
I thought it was a Georgia defensive front that was getting after him most of the time, and they were covering up his receivers.
That's true. I mean, maybe I was just expecting maybe some more. Like if they're going to go in Athens and going to win, you just need that high level quarterback play to probably be able to go and do so. So maybe that's where I was going with that. I agree with you. I don't think he was necessarily bad. I did want to stipulate that, but I just didn't think he played at that really high level they needed to try and be able to pull that game out in the second half.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wanted to say though, I did that was a kind of a marker game for me for Tennessee. I don't know if it was for you. I thought if Tennessee could have gone in there and pulled off that win, I would have been able to mark them as a team that was talked about earlier in the year, that's a team that's capable of in that group of 5 or maybe 6 that I feel that can win a national championship. I don't know if that game swayed you one way or another about them.
Oh, it swayed me.
Okay.
Not considerably. I do realize, and if we take the entire season into account, that we're only 1 week removed from Georgia going into a similar hostile environment and getting smacked around even worse than Tennessee did. Tennessee was much more in that game last night than Georgia was at Ole Miss. And it kind of played out in a similar fashion, at least on the scoreboard, that Georgia gets a pick. They take it in for a touchdown against Ole Miss on a short field, didn't even drive the ball. And then the rest of the night, they were non existent. So we're only 1 week removed from that. So if these were neutral site games, I don't want to put too much on home field advantage, but look at this. Tennessee beat Bama at home.
Right.
Georgia beat Tennessee at home. Ole Miss beat Georgia at home. Georgia won at Texas. We've
Right.
got that. LSU beat for as marginal as LSU has been throughout most of this season. They did beat Ole Miss at home.
Right.
Alabama went to Death Valley. That's an impressive win in the fashion that they got it. So I'm not saying that the trend is absolute, but home field advantage has been fairly significant in these SEC games.
Yeah. By the way, how is South Carolina as dangerous as people make them out to be?
I think they are. I saw them play one bad game against Ole Miss, and they lost 27-3. But it was kind of like a slow. Shane Beamer made a really questionable decision early in that game. There was no score, and he went for a fake punt, like at his own 28-yard line, and it just sent the game in the wrong direction. They gave up an early touchdown because of that, and that was the one game that they didn't play well. This Lenora Sellers, I think he's one of the big keys because they had the defense.
Oh, that defensive line is
Oh
legit, Mark.
man,
Yeah.
Kyle Kennard
Yep.
and the rest of those guys, Dylan Stewart,
Yes.
and then Rocket Sanders is an excellent running back. And so anyway, I think Lenora Sellers getting better and better and better. Yeah, every other game that I saw him play, Bama start to finish, LSU start to finish, probably another game in there somewhere that I can't think of, but every other game, even the losses have been really good performances. Yeah.
Boy, boy, they're really going to regret the way they handled that end of that Alabama game and that end of that LSU game, by
Yes.
the way. Wow. If they look back on their season, and by the way, one of the bigger South Carolina Clemson games we've seen in maybe a while, you know?
Well,
I
from the
mean,
standpoint, neither
we have
one of
two
them
decent
appear to.
teams, I guess. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
they're
Mark.
two decent teams in terms of their own little in-state rivalry and it being a good game and an interesting watch. But it seems as though they both played themselves out.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Maybe, yeah, they're decent, but maybe not decent enough, I guess is probably the line. Maybe I should have put it that way.
Clemson needs Miami to lose a game to make the ACC championship game. So Clemson's in the clubhouse. They're
Yeah,
done.
right.
I always find this interesting for those teams that play the non-conference rivalry game at the end of the year. Then they scheduled the cream puff the week before. So Clemson's already done with the season in the ACC. They're in the clubhouse at 7-1. They need Miami to lose one of two. And so if for anybody out there that Clemson's going to be banking on the right arm of Kyle McCord in a couple of weeks to pull off the upset.
Hey, I said Miami and Syracuse could be very big at the end of the year, and I'm sticking by that. Honda could give that Miami team a lot of problems, no
They've
doubt
got a
about it.
date against UConn this week that they, of course, should navigate. Not that UConn isn't having a bit of a upsurge this year, but Syracuse should win the game to go to 8-3 entering that Miami game.
Right. No, I've pegged that Miami Syracuse game as like 44-41 since like earlier in the season.
Yes.
McCord and Ward in a shootout.
McCord,
So,
the completions leader in college football.
yeah. Well, yeah, like I say, Miami scores a lot. They give up a lot. That game's going to see some points. So, yeah, it's reshuffled the deck in the SEC, and then it's going to be interesting. I think you still peg that Texas at Texas A&M. There's Texas's path to Atlanta is basically go to College Station and win,
Yep.
and then figuring out the other opponent. I have you already done the video to see where we get to find the other half of that equation.
I'm just dusting myself off from all the games yesterday. So yeah, it's time for me to get the notepads going.
There we go.
Work and break down these scenarios.
Absolutely. Hey, got to get a big preview of Indiana, Ohio State next week. Who would have thought it, Mark? The game of the year, maybe in the Big Ten. No, I shouldn't have said that, but it's one of the 2 or 3 biggest games in the Big Ten this year.
Oh, absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
Should I throw out a free pick on this one? I think I don't know that anything's going to change my mind on this one.
Okay.
You might as well just throw it out right now. Ohio State 38, Indiana 17.
That sounds about right. I said 17 points earlier in the week to a friend of mine. A game that could be competitive for 3 quarters. I could see a competitive, like a 1-possession game for 3 quarters, and then Ohio State just depth pulls away in the 4th. Although I will say this, especially watching Ohio State a little bit, 90% of them play the game against Northwestern. Northwestern's passing game will cause them some issues, particularly early in that game. Rourke will be able to make some plays and make some throws, but I just think Ohio State's depth and overall talent will win out in the end. So
yeah, Bryce Kurtz and AJ Henning pulled down some nice catches there in the first couple drives of the game. And Ohio State has some kind of issue. Jim Knowles, I've got to put it on him that the first couple drives of every game, the defense it takes them a while to settle in.
Yeah, well, he finally finds a blitz package that can work eventually. You know what I mean? Instead of, bringing the safety or the corner from 12 yards back that like never works. I've bemoaned this on shows, the Buckeye show, like a zillion times. I will say this, Denzel Burke might be losing himself some dollars this year.
Yeah.
He might be losing himself some dollars this year,
after the Oregon debacle, I give him a lot of credit for playing very tenaciously the next few weeks. He did a lot of things like in run support and in playing like screen passes, short passes, and being very physical, stopping receivers in the open field. And he's a well-rounded cornerback outside of the coverage skills. Like he's a willing tackler. He's got good fundamentals and all those things, but I was watching that thinking, I'm giving this guy a lot of credit because he's bouncing back. He's showing some fight after being embarrassed last week, but it's not what we need to see out of him. It's not an elite receiver on the other side taking him to school down the field and him showing that, okay, that was a one-off. I'm better than that. And so we'll see it this week. He did get exposed again yesterday a few times, and we'll see this week against Indiana, and then, of course, in a probable Oregon championship game.
Yeah, that's what I said is they'll test the pass defense overall. So, All right, really good week of college football. We come back next week. Notre Dame Army's also next week. That's going to be intriguing. Could be a good one next week as well. All right. Well, always a pleasure to talk college football with the great Mark Rogers. You have yourself a great day, Mark.
Absolutely, David. Appreciate you being here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
David Greenshield, everyone. Big Buckeyes fan. Thanks for joining us here at the Voice of College Football. And we are in the midst of our call-in show that we provide for you each and every Sunday morning. So if you would like to see more, hear more from callers, last night's show, it's obviously just been in the books for about 10 hours. We go live after all the primetime games on Saturday night, about midnight Eastern time, and join you for a couple hours each Saturday. So keep that in mind. We typically go live on Thursday and Friday night. This past weekend, it didn't work out, but typically Thursday and Friday night after the games, or if the games are ultra late, we'll do a pregame. Let's see what we've got on tap for this week. To look ahead to week 13. Here we go. Let's check out Maction. Why not? Tuesday, Akron and Kent State. Always two of the worst teams in college football matching up in the wagon wheel game. Quite the rivalry. CBS Sportsnet on Tuesday night. Western Michigan, Central Michigan get together on ESPN2. And then we've got Northern Illinois against Miami. And of course, NIU will forever be associated with Notre Dame. Wednesday, we've got Buffalo, Eastern Michigan, Ohio, and Toledo. I believe the Bobcats and the Rockets, that's a big game because of their conference records at 5-1 and 4-2. All right, let's get to the power conference matchup starting on Thursday night. NC State and Georgia Tech. That basically for bowl positioning. That's all that is. NC State's 5-5, Georgia Tech 6-4. Will I watch that game? Yes, I will watch that game unless I have better plans because I watch college football games. Friday, Temple, Texas, San Antonio. That's a lousy game. UNLV, San Jose State. That's actually a good game. And we'd have to check out the Mountain West Conference standings to see if that is integral, which I believe it is, to who could play in the conference championship game. But both of those teams are quality teams. San Jose State gave Boise State a game until the Broncos ran away with it. We'll have to check Ashton Genty's stats on that game. I saw some highlights and saw him running down the field for 60 and 70 yards a pop. Purdue at Michigan State, awful Big Ten game, but it's on Fox. I'll watch it. Again, Friday, if I have plans, great. If I don't, I'm watching college football and I'll watch Purdue and Michigan State, which means with that setup, we'll probably go after the Purdue-Michigan State game. Or maybe we'll just go during the Purdue-Michigan State game. We shall see. Stay tuned. All right, on Saturday, Indiana at Ohio State, of course. Wake Forest at Miami. The Canes have to win to hold on to an ACC championship game berth. Ole Miss, Florida. The Rebels, of course, cannot lose. And look, that is a better matchup than we anticipated a few weeks ago. The Gators are fighting for Billy Napier, and of course, he's been given a vote of confidence and extension. It's I don't know that his contract has been extended. He has been verbally, publicly supported as being the Florida coach for 2025. SMU at Virginia. SMU played around with Boston College and only had a 3-point lead late in that game, winning by 10. So SMU upset alert at Virginia. Illinois, Rutgers, Illinois looking at a nice 9-3 season if they can complete the run against Rutgers and Northwestern, two teams that they are definitely better than. Iowa at Maryland, UConn, Syracuse again. Syracuse at 7-3 this season, and UConn's off to a 7-3 start as well under Jim Mora. North Carolina, Boston College. North Carolina has quietly righted their season to a certain extent. They got off to an awful start, 0-3 in the ACC, and they've won all their conference games since then. I believe they are now 6-4 after defeating Wake Forest, Sam Houston, Jacksonville State, UMass, Georgia. Of course, it's the scrimmage weekend in the SEC before the rivalry week. UTEP at Tennessee, Western Kentucky at Liberty. Charleston Southern, can they get it done against Florida State and join the list of teams that took down the Seminoles this year? And if Florida State can't win that game, then I don't know that the depths of Florida State football can be any deeper. Bowling Green at Ball State, Rice at UAB, New Mexico State takes on Middle Tennessee, and Derek Mason, James Madison, App State. Arizona at TCU, the Wildcats finally played a decent game under Brent Brennan, defeating Houston by 24 points this past weekend. TCU, I believe, is a 5-5 football team under Sonny Dykes. FIU, Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State, I don't understand. Their coach was successful. I didn't look into this, but the coach was successful on the FCS level to lift them to FBS play. This is their first season in the FBS. They are 1-8, something like that, and he gets fired. Louisiana Monroe at Arkansas State, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, Kentucky at Texas. Ouch, Mark Stoops. Look out. Kentucky is 4-6. They defeated Murray State and in their November scrimmage game. All right, look out, Penn State. Difficult matchup at Minnesota. The Gophers coming off a bye week. Could be a difficult one for Penn State. Minnesota was on a roll, and they had a fourth quarter lead last weekend against Rutgers and blew it and lost. Okay, look at this one. BYU at Arizona State. Cougars lost. They were in perfect position to move on to the conference championship game undefeated, taking on a 3-6 Kansas team at home. Lost the game. Arizona State quietly creeping up the Big 12 standings. 2-loss Arizona State, 1-loss BYU. If Arizona State wins this game, they take the head-to-head tiebreaker over BYU, and we could possibly see a Colorado-Arizona State Big 12 championship game. How about that? Speaking of which, Colorado can't let down at Kansas. The Jayhawks are playing better football in recent weeks. Clemson has its layup before South Carolina in the Citadel, Northwestern at Michigan. Wildcats have to win their final two games to get to a bowl. Michigan's got to win one of two to get to a bowl. They're 5-5. So the Wolverines, if they lose to the Wildcats this week at home, which they shouldn't, point spread out yet on this one? No. I'm going to guess Michigan should be about a 10-point favorite. Wisconsin at Nebraska. Both teams need to win to secure bowl eligibility. That has been the case for Nebraska for the last 7 years. Stanford at Cal. I don't like this. Why is the ACC playing this game on the penultimate weekend of the season? Stanford Cal should be on the final weekend of the season. I do not get that. Somebody would have to explain that to me. Texas Tech playing outside of Florida State, the most disappointing team in college football. Oklahoma State brings back a 7th-year starting quarterback, the rushing champion, 3 excellent receivers. What is supposed to be considered, if I went to my Phil Steele or any other professional first-rate publication preseason, they would have Oklahoma State listed as a top 5 to 10 offensive line in the country. They brought back 21 of 22 starters. They are 0-7. In a bad conference. Okay, Central Florida, West Virginia. That reminds me that we should do a hot seat video because I think Neil Brown is there. Maybe this is a hot coaching game right here. Gus Malzahn and Neil Brown. San Diego State at Utah State, Georgia Southern at Coastal Carolina, East Carolina at North Texas. The Pirates are having a nice bounce back season at 6-4. Tulsa at South Florida. Jeff Scott's a good coach. By the way, he's going to be your next Power 5 coach, or maybe not the next one, but he's going to be in the next wave. Pitt at Louisville. I was impressed with Pitt against Clemson. They should have won that game. Louisville took a downer against Stanford. Inexplicable. So this is going to be a better game possibly than I anticipated, because I thought going into last Saturday that Louisville was a decidedly better team, but maybe not. Wofford, South Carolina, Louisiana Tech, Arkansas. The Hogs need to win to get to bowl eligibility at 5-5. Mizzou blew its playoff chances, losing to South Carolina in the final 15 seconds. Rocket Sanders with the touchdown for South Carolina as Mizzou fell. Otherwise, they were looking to pull off the upset in Columbia and could be playing a huge game against Mississippi State, but this one now is irrelevant. Troy at Louisiana, Army at Notre Dame. Wow, I will be watching this game. Army, Notre Dame. We might have to do a comparison video here because Notre Dame played Navy, of course, earlier this season. Army, Navy, we always attach those two for obvious reasons. But in addition to that, from a football standpoint, are some similarities there, or appeared to be at one point in the season. But as the season is worn on, it does appear that Navy is not Army, that Army is a decidedly better team than Navy. I started to do some statistical comparisons on this game this week and on Army versus Navy. So Army may be better equipped to beat Notre Dame than Navy was, because certainly they were not, and the Irish trampled Navy. Boise State at Wyoming. The Broncos continue to roll. They won by 21 against San Jose State on Saturday night. Washington State lost. Okay, enough talk about Washington State being an actually good football team. They're not. They were 8-1 against a lousy schedule. They did lose by 3 touchdowns to Boise State. They did pull off a win on a goal line stand against Washington, who's a marginal team, of course, in the Big Ten. So I know it's fun to talk about, and I take in that conversation as well. I join in the, wow, Washington State's 8-1. Let's talk about their playoff possibilities. No, they're not a good team. They lost to New Mexico. They're not a good team. Let me double check that. Did they pull that game out? I think they lost. Yes, they lost to New Mexico 38-35. So enough of that talk. This is a fun one in regards to this is the Pac-2, Washington State, Oregon State. I find it funny that they're going to play a 2-game series next year. They're going to play home and home. Baylor at Houston. You probably haven't noticed, but the Baylor Bears beat West Virginia by 2 touchdowns. They are now 6-4. So Dave Aranda has possibly saved his job. Georgia State, Texas State, Bama, Oklahoma. Tide should roll, but this was a game that we looked at, and it's going to be played on ABC just because Oklahoma's got a name brand and Alabama's Alabama, and they are playing for a college football playoff spot, but this could be an awful ABC game. Texas A&M against one of the most disappointing teams in the country, Auburn. Trampled some scrimmage team, Louisiana Monroe or somebody, on Saturday by 34 points, but otherwise Auburn has not played one good game this year. Iowa State at Utah, the Cyclones looking to win and get a ton of help. Marshall, Old Dominion, Vandy, and LSU. LSU has taken themselves out of the game. Cincinnati, Kansas State. Wildcats lost a big game against Arizona State. They are out of the Big 12 race. Virginia Tech and Duke. USC, UCLA. 10:30 Eastern on NBC. Well, I will be here with all of you. Therefore, I will not be able to watch the game. I'll probably watch the replay because it is just not right if I don't watch USC and UCLA. I just have to watch the game. There are certain games in college football I have to watch, and that is one of them. Air Force, Nevada. Air Force pulled off a big win they pulled off an upset against somebody. I can't remember. Air Force is having a horrible year this year, but they, yes, beat Oregon State 28-0. That shows you how bad Oregon State is. And Washington State is not a good football team in terms of power conference evaluation. Colorado State, Fresno State, CBS Sportsnet at 10:30. So we do, unlike some of the most recent weeks in college football, have some late night games that are kind of worth watching if you're a nerd junkie like me. Let's get to work. We've got power rankings for all the conferences. We've got championship scenarios to look at, college football playoff scenarios. I would like to look at the Heisman, may get a chance to look at that. Some of the conversations we've had today has put a few topics in my mind, a few possible comparisons or ideas. So we will see what we come up with. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. You guys have a great Sunday. And the next time you will see me live will be, most likely, we'll be here. Listen up. We got the watch party coming up on Tuesday night. So when the college football playoff rankings are revealed, be right here with all of us watching the rankings unveiling together. And then, of course, we'll take your comments, questions, and calls, and we will analyze it all together. So Tuesday night, please join me right here. Great to have you here at the Voice of College Football. Enjoy your Sunday.